All right, Genesis 48. Tonight, blessing. Blessing our families, blessing our children, blessing our grandchildren. God is our Father, blessing us, putting His hand on our life. It's a wonderful thing when we get to the point in our life, and we know that Jacob and all of his family, they have been through some hard times. But here at the end of this book of Genesis, they're together and there is a blessing available for them. God has blessed them. And now Jacob wants to bless his family. And so we start out in chapter 48, and we'll read the first 7 verses first. Now it came to pass after these things that Joseph was told, "Indeed, your father is sick." What he meant by that, he is sick to the point of death. He's not just feeling bad, he's dying. And he took with him 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Jacob was told, "Look, your son Joseph is coming to you." And Israel strengthened himself and sat up on the bed. Then Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me, and said to me, Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make of you a multitude of people, and give this land to your descendants after you as an everlasting possession. And now your 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. Your offspring whom you beget, after them shall be yours. They will be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. But as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died beside me in the land of Canaan on the way, and there was but a little distance to go to Ephraim. And I buried her there on the way to Ephraim, that is, Jerusalem." I think that's a great passage. Israel is dying. He hears that Joseph is coming to see him, so he strengthens himself with everything that he's got, and he sits up on the bed to get ready to bless his son. And Joseph, recognizing that his father was dying, took the 2 sons that were born to him in Egypt to go see their grandfather one last time before he passes. And he was anticipating a blessing. It was tradition. It's what families did. It's what fathers did, as far as the Jewish people, Hebrew people. And so Joseph wanted to take his 2 boys to go see their grandfather, anticipating the great blessing. I don't think he realized how much of a blessing it was going to be, but he did anticipate a blessing. And the first thing that happened was that Jacob repeated the Abrahamic covenant that had been given to him at Bethel, that you will prosper. I'm going to give you this land. And I'm going to give you so many descendants, you'll have many nations that will go by your name. And I'm going to give you this land. So he repeats to Joseph the Abrahamic covenant. And here he focuses on, in this part of it, this time, he focuses on descendants and land. And I think Jacob probably did that because he thought that was the greatest blessing that he had, that he could give to them, was the promise that they would multiply. Because God, as his father, had promised him he would multiply. And he wanted to pass that on to his children. And also that of land. God has promised me that land of Canaan, that it will be mine and my descendants. And now I'm giving you the same promise. And you can trust God to fulfill it. Now, isn't that a wonderful thing for us as believers to be able to do? When we get to a certain point in our life, maybe towards the end of our life, that we can talk to our children about how God has blessed us. And the blessings that He's given us may not be lands and many descendants, But we can talk about the things that we know where God has been faithful to us and how He has blessed us. And we can say, you can trust God to do that for you too. Here's how He has blessed me. If you trust Him, He will bless you as well. And we pass those promises on. You know, as a Christian father and grandfather, those are the things I want to pass on to my children and grandchildren. It's the faithfulness of God. Not how much earthly material things I can leave them that will pass away, but the things that will last forever. Those are the things that I want them to eventually see in my life. And I know for a lot of people, you know, we may not have been so close to God when we raised our children. And so we have to go back to them and say, look, I haven't always lived the life I wish I would have lived, but I've given my life to God. I've given my life to Jesus. Here's how God has blessed me. And I want you to know, if you give your life to Jesus, He will bless you as well. That's what Jacob wanted. And he's finally come to the place in his life, on his deathbed, where this is the most important thing to him. Now, he guarantees for them, for these two boys, an equal share. He says, it's like I'm adopting you. You are mine. He said, now Joseph, all the other children you have, they will be yours. But these two boys are mine. And they're going to get the same amount that Simeon and Reuben and all my 11 sons, they're going to get the same blessing from me that my other boys are going to get. So he raises them from the status of being grandsons to being sons. Now we could say, okay, here he goes again. We thought that he wouldn't do this anymore, but here he goes again, showing favoritism. And it can kind of seem that way, that he's giving them more than he gives the others. Hadn't that always happened? I mean, didn't Joseph do that with Benjamin? Didn't Jacob do that with Joseph and Benjamin? There seems to be, and we can look at it as favoritism. But as we go on to understand this family and the purposes that God had for them, these blessings were because of what God had planned for them and the place that they would have. And so when we look at our children and our grandchildren, and we'll see more of this later on in this story, but if we see where God has His hand on one of them, and there's something that we can do to promote that or benefit that, there are ways that we want to be equal and fair and treat them all with love and not have favorites. But in the spiritual area, if we see one of our grandchildren or grandchildren that really God has called them out for something unique, then we want to do everything within our power to make that happen and to encourage them in it. Some people may look at it and say, well, that's your favorite. No, but God's called them to something different from what He's called my other children or my other grandchildren. I see God in their life in a special way, and I'm going to support that. Not that I won't love and care for and meet every need that all my children have. But God has His hand on this child, and I can already see it, and I'm going to support that. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's not a lesser love for the others. It's just spiritual discernment. God has something unique planned for this child, for this person, and I'm not going to hold back in my support for that. And so I don't think it was favoritism. Maybe it was a little bit of a thank you to Joseph for delivering the whole family. You know, they all would have died in famine if Joseph hadn't been so faithful and brought them all to Egypt where they could eat and have a place to live and become very wealthy. And so maybe this on Jacob's part, as far as his own thinking, was a thank you. And I think we should understand there are sometimes we do things and we just have a sense about it. And maybe we're doing it as a thank you, or we think we see something, but in reality, God's working in ways that we can't even realize yet to fulfill His plan for somebody's life. Now, we may look on it later on and say, well, I didn't even realize what I was doing, but I'm glad that I was a friend to that person. I'm glad that I tried to be a blessing to that person. I'm glad that I supported them in what they were trying to do. And we didn't even realize how big the plan was that God had for that person. All right, let's read verses 8 through 20. Well, any time you have a thought, I get to talking and teaching stuff, and I hardly slow down. But if you have a thought or a question, please speak up. That's Wednesday nights. That's the reason I stand down here. It's informal, and if you want to participate, please do. Verse 8, Then Israel saw Joseph's sons and said, Who are these? Joseph said to his father, They are my sons, whom God has given me in this place. And he said, Please bring them to me, and I will bless them. Now, the eyes of Israel, and Israel is the other name for who? Jacob, yeah. Now, the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see. Then Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, I had not thought to see your face, but in fact, God has also shown me your offspring. So Joseph brought them from beside his knees, and he bowed down with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. Then Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, who was the younger, but his left hand on Manasseh's head, guiding his hands knowingly. For Manasseh was the firstborn, and he blessed Joseph and said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has fed me all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless these lads. I love that prayer of how he calls on God in specific ways and says, bless these lads, bless these boys. Let my name be named upon them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Now when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. So he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Can you just see this? And we'll talk about the reason for it. But Joseph tried to change things. Verse 18, And Joseph said to his father, Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. So that explains why Joseph put him in the position he did. Then it's like Jacob crossed his arms and did what he felt like he wanted to do based on what God was telling him to do. Verse 19. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. And you can almost hear the frustration. Don't tell me what to do. I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. So he blessed them that day, saying, By you Israel will bless, saying, May God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And thus he set Ephraim before Manasseh. So here we see these verses in this part of the story of the blessing of his family, the blessing of his grandsons who he has promoted to be like his sons. And it comes with their inheritance. And so he's told Joseph he couldn't see because of age, and his eyes had dimmed, He said, bring your sons to me so that I can bless them. That's what Joseph wanted. He was anticipating that, and that's what he wanted. Before his father died, through Abraham and Isaac and now Israel, to bless his boys. That's what he wanted. And so Jacob says, bring them so I can bless them. This meant to request God's favor. And we can see from his prayer, that's what he's asking. He's asking the Almighty God, the God of his fathers, the God who's proven himself faithful, to bless these two boys. And to bless means to request that God's favor would rest upon them. So what word would we use in the New Testament for God's favor?
Grace.
Yes, absolutely. It's not a principle that is foreign to us. What we pray for is what Paul prayed for. Paul prayed for healing. Remember, he prayed for healing 3 times? But what did he want more than healing? Grace. Yes, God, I want to be healed of this disease. But if having this disease means I get more grace, I choose the grace. And so when Jacob is praying for these boys, he's asking for God's favor. So what more could we ask for our families than that God's grace would rest on them? I mean, you might say, okay, God, make my child wealthy. Make my child prosperous. Give them a place down at the beach so I can go stay with them. We might pray those kind of things. But the truth is, as believers who are thinking about not only today, but all the days that they may have and eternity, what more could we possibly ask for than God's favor? God's grace always to be on their lives. Because even if they do experience a lot of success, does that guarantee that they're going to be happy people? No, it doesn't. But the thing that will bring rest, peace, happiness, joy is the person who lives under God's grace and always experiencing God's favor in their life. Had Joseph been shown favoritism as a child? Yes, he had. Did God use that to put Joseph where he needed him to be? Yes, he did. So sometimes we make mistakes with our children, with our families. God has the power to correct it. And He will. And He will if a person will trust Him. God can take care of a lot of past mistakes because He has a lot of forgiveness to give out through His grace. And He can fix a lot of stuff for a person who will trust Him. But Joseph tries to correct the situation because from his point of view, wait a minute, that's not right. You got it in the wrong order, Dad. Yeah, I brought them here for you to bless them, but do it the right way. You know, is what he was seeing. And
he's also seeing him like he's dying.
And blind.
And blind.
Yeah.
And he's maybe dealing with a little dementia.
Yeah. So he wants to help.
Yeah.
But Jacob didn't want to help. Jacob refused to be corrected, and he let him know this is not a mistake. I'm doing what I'm doing on purpose because I can see things with my spirit and with what God has done, God's faithfulness and God's purposes and plans through the promises, the covenants that He has made with me, that my eyes can't see. I can see it, but my eyes may not see your boys, but God's already put it in my heart what to do here, so don't try to correct me. Leave me alone. I know what I'm doing. It was a purposeful action that would reflect God's plan for both of these boys. There's a lot of ways we can apply that, but let's just move on and think. Sometimes God does work. It's not a Bible verse, but God works in mysterious ways, right? To perform wonderful things. And we don't always understand it. Hopefully, our spiritual eyes will get better at seeing things that our physical eyes can't see. You know, we see things from our point of view, but hopefully we'll get better at seeing things from God's point of view. because we live under His grace and His promise. So Jacob declared that Ephraim's descendants would be greater and become a group of nations. And it's true, during the time of the divided kingdom in Isaiah, talks about it in Hosea, Ephraim's descendants would be the most powerful of any tribe in the north. They would be the greatest warriors. They would have the greatest numbers, the best army. They would be number one among the tribes of the north. Ephraim would be. His descendants would be. And a lot of times, his name would be used to identify the entire northern kingdom when Israel was split between the northern and southern kingdoms. Ephraim would be the most powerful of those tribes in the north, of those boys. He was a grandson who became like a son. He would be great. So the proclamation that Israel makes here, or that Jacob makes, is, by you Israel will bless, and may God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh. So again, he reverses the birth order. Instead of putting Manasseh, the oldest, first, he puts Ephraim, the youngest, first. And he says, may God bless you the way God's going to bless them, Joseph, and all of our family. Sometimes God's plans goes against our family traditions, doesn't it? Sometimes God does things that we never even imagined in the lives of our children or grandchildren or friends, our church family. He picks people that we might never imagine. When David became king, how many people looked at all the boys and said, yeah, David's the one? When Samuel was looking at him. Did anybody want to pick David? No. But who picked David? Samuel. Yeah. God did through Samuel. And why did God pick him? Well, what's the principle there? Mankind, or men, people look at what? The outside. But God looks at the heart. And sometimes it's difficult for you and I to be able to see that. However, even though Ephraim will be, as the younger, will become the greater, both of these boys are going to be significantly blessed. Because it came from the promise that God made to Abraham, as we study that. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, now to all these different boys, they will be significantly blessed. All right, let's look at verses 21 on through. Then Israel said to Joseph, behold, I am dying, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to you one portion above your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow. So here Israel is declaring that he's about to die. He's already made Joseph promise, when I die, don't bury me in Egypt, take me back to Canaan. And so he says here, not only will I go back and be buried in Canaan, but so will you. You've been in Egypt all this time, but you won't be buried here. And it's going to be good. It's another good passage when we look at that in chapter 50. But he says here, when he uses the words you and your in the Hebrew, it's plural. So it's not just you, Joseph. It's not just your descendants. It's all of them. All of your family, all of your brothers, all of their descendants, all of our family is going to be taken back to the promised land. We will return. Now Joseph will be taken back after his death. It's going to be 400 years before the nation of Israel is back in the promised land. Because as we've said a couple times, when this Pharaoh dies, the next Pharaoh is going to be more of a traditional Egyptian, and he's going to hate the Hebrew people. And he's going to turn them from managing the land and growing wealthy off of the land. He's going to turn them into slaves to make him wealthy. And so it'll be 400 years before they get back. Joseph's given a double portion because just like Joseph's dream, finally now Jacob sees it. Joseph is above his brothers. And he has already shown that in the way he provided for them, and so he gets a double blessing. Joseph was not the oldest son, Reuben was. But he had messed up. And he had lost the privilege of the eldest son. And Joseph had taken it. Joseph was the one who would provide for his family, who has provided for his family. And the ridge of the land, the area that Jacob is promising to Joseph, is the land of Shechem. You remember when we talked about that and all the stuff that happened in Shechem and how it was conquered by Jacob as a mighty warrior. And so he says, I'm going to give you that, and that's where you will be buried. And again, we've talked a lot about favoritism. But what Jacob did here, what Israel did for Joseph, should not be looked at from our point of view as favoritism, but more as an honor of what Joseph had done for his family in being faithful through all the trials, all the tests. Joseph was the one who had been proven faithful to a faithful God through everything. And so here, Israel, Jacob, his father, is honoring Joseph because of his faithfulness and his provision for the whole family. Because of his loyalty to them, his loyalty to God. All right, a couple more weeks and we'll be through Genesis. But I think this is a great study to see it coming to this point where this family that has been through so much hardship, so much divisive stuff, now they're back together for a family blessing. All right, thank y'all. Thank y'all for coming out on Wednesday night.